welcome to my channel. My name is Neo-Psych. I'm a psychologist in private practice and working within the NGO space. And today we're going to be talking about burnout. So, what exactly is burnout? Well, to make it simple, it can be defined as a sense of extreme exhaustion affecting one's emotional, physical, and mental states caused by prolonged stress. Now, this can be experienced both within the academic space as a student, as you go through long hours of studying and just pushing through course, or within the work environment where you're experiencing high levels of pressure as you go through your workday. So it's important to understand it's not caused by simply working long hours, but rather goes a little bit further than that, where there is not a consistent state of rest or calm, but rather that you are always working on an adrenaline high and in a state of needing to perform at what feels like a very high and pressurized level. So we've already identified how burnout is associated to prolonged feelings of stress or repeated stress, where one is typically feeling consistently on edge or functioning at high adrenaline levels, often related to the performance related to a task, whether within the academic or work environment. Now, the stress often introduces another emotional or mood-based experience, and that is anxiety. Now, you may ask yourself, where does anxiety actually comes in? And where it features within the burnout conversation is that the worry that one then feels often arises because of the stress you feel when you're having to complete a particular task. So now you're going to think about it in this way, where the pressure is high and inclusive of all that it comes with, so having to show up, having to be dedicated, having to work at a particular level, having to consistently be on tap. So too comes the concern around the outcomes being just as high. So I'm already worried about having to be at a particular level or at a particular performance. Now I have to worry about, will I be good enough? Will I achieve what is expected of me? Will I be the best version of myself? Now this is where the adrenaline or the cortisol levels are most associated. That is consistently high, consistently elevated, and never really an opportunity for the body to reboot and calm down. So now burnout isn't necessarily a new concept. Granted, I think with the introduction of us working from home during the COVID periods of our lives, it probably became a little bit more popular or became a little bit more evident, where the blurring of the lines between work and home was more prominent. So it seems to have increased during COVID, where the lines, like I mentioned, were blurred, where home, which was usually a place of rest, and work, which is a place of performance, often enmeshed. Now, many people very often just kept on working. It was no longer a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 4. It now became whenever I need to work, I then show up. Now, another issue that could have also been a possible reason for how it is, burnout and just the increased levels of burnout may have shown up in us as humans, not only within the work or the academic space, is the slowing down of our general pace that COVID did introduce. Now, what often happens when your body comes to a slower pace, it often catches up with itself. So this brought about a greater awareness of perhaps a lot of exhaustion, long existing exhaustion that many people have had experienced. So when you're sitting and you're at home and you're a little bit less in a rush and able to pay closer attention to yourself, what often happens is that your mind and your emotions end up catching up with your body. And what our body then tells us is, I'm run down and I'm tired. And that's when the feelings and the awareness and sometimes the triggers of exactly what burnout is come to the surface. So now that we have a little bit more of awareness as to what burnout is, an extreme sense of exhaustion, which affects our cognitive, our emotional, and our physical, and we understand perhaps where it comes from and how it's come to rise, chances are it's been there for an extended period of time, but the rise during pro-COVID and slowing down the pace and the enmeshment of work and home coming together, we're now a little bit more aware of, okay, so what exactly might be causing these particular experiences, but then also how or in what environment can it be most prevalent, for lack of a better explanation. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the signs of pending or possible burnout. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like we had said, that it is the extreme sense of exhaustion which hits 3 parts or 3 areas of your general functioning, right? So your mind, your heart, and your body. And some signs that I'd definitely like to have you kind of consider and look out for when it comes to the possible signs of burnout are threefold. So the first is related to our cognitive. Number one, when you start to be aware of the challenges that you're experiencing when it comes to your concentration, what that speaks to above all else is you're no longer really able to pay attention for as long as you used to be able to, right? So you're easily distracted, or just being able to kind of stay on a task proves to be a little bit harder. Additionally to that, you experience greater sense of self-doubt, or second guessing your knowledge, just always being in a doubtful space. You're also feeling a little bit more ineffective, right? So changes in how you usually grasp concepts or grasping knowledge, how you would catch things, seems to be a little bit slowed down. That's the first part when it comes to cognitive changes that you can pay attention to. The second is that of the emotional changes. And typically when we're going into a place of really possibly approaching burnout, it speaks to an unusual emotional reactivity, right? So more so sensitive or possibly uncontained. So you're feeling very emotionally overwhelmed more often than not, or just uncertain as to where these feelings come from. Over and above, there's also just a fluctuation of your general emotions. So you go from being sad to being angry to being irritable to being completely indifferent. You're always just moving up and down, again, without clear certainty as to what it is the trigger might be or what it's rooted at. But there's a fluctuation of our emotions, but the biggest thing is that we're feeling overwhelmed and uncontained regarding our emotions. And then third speaks more to the physical. And from a physical stance, when we're approaching or within burnout, we're feeling a lot more exhausted. As I mentioned, it is an extreme presentation of exhaustion, right? So you're feeling physically exhausted and also really demotivated. So the things that you used to find interest in, getting up, being engaged, moving and participating, no longer seems to be of great interest to you. Another big factor is sleeping patterns shift. So very often you might find that you are struggling to sleep, which is the common experience, but then also you're sleeping more often than usual, right? So this is based off of your norm. Now people are different. Some people sleep more than others sleep less than others. But you've got to always be aware of what your norm is and how you're presenting or behaving differently to your norm. So when it comes to the sleeping, you're sleeping more or less often, but there's a consistent desire in some way or another also to just really detach from things, from responsibilities. As mentioned a little bit in terms of the emotionals, where you're feeling demotivated, you have no interest in engaging. If you had it your way, you would probably just be sitting in one corner and just allowing life to happen in your absence. Now, from the cognitive to the emotional, all the way to the physical, these three markers and the changes in how you're presenting yourself from your norms are big indicators of what could be going wrong. Now, we've always got to consider these elements in combination, right? So all three of them together. It's also very important to understand, though, that it's not always just rooted significantly and only or solely to a burnout state of mind. It can also be associated to other mood disorders, things such as, major depressive disorder or an anxiety disorder or even a generalized anxiety disorder. However, it's always important to recognize that if there is a shift, then you come and see a professional so you can get a more defined and definitive understanding as to whether it is more of a mood disorder or if we're finding ourselves moving into more of the burnout region. So somehow at this particular point, my audio cut and I'm not certain as to what exactly happened, but I do apologize. But in essence, the discussion and the conversation at this point in time is speaking more so around what it is we can start looking towards and how it is we can start learning to cope and better place ourselves in better positioning to work through signs and symptoms that relate to burnout. So the conversation is around what exactly are the coping strategies and how we can best make sure that we're fitting ourselves to be better prepared, then also work through what might be a burnout process. So the first step is always closely linked and placed insofar as understanding the patterns of your behavior. You've got to better understand yourself to know exactly what is your norm and what isn't your norm. Once you're able to better identify this, then you'll be able to start off with strategy number 1, which is boundary setting. And this really just speaks more than anything to better understanding and observing yourself insofar as what is capable on your plate. What are you going through? What are you doing? But more than anything, being able to be very certain around clearing your schedule so it's not overly filled with things that are going to make you feel overwhelmed and unable to process or attend to particular things. So boundary setting is an element that speaks to notions of self-care, right? So having a clear awareness as to what it is you need to get done and what you need when it comes to not getting things done. So we're putting ourselves in better positions to not be overwhelmed for one, but being better well suited in being able to better say the word no. So clear your schedule so that you can have time for yourself, have time for the things that make you excited, have time for the things that put you in a frame of mind that creates a sense of capability and confidence. So it's about being in a position, and more than anything, in a space where you are creating an action-oriented capacity, right? So when you are making actions, when you are in a space of doing better, you are moving your body, not so that you can reach targets, but get some blood flow into your body, getting there with those endorphins and that cortisol to be placed in an energetic space more so than anything else. You're framing your mind for good movement. Step number 2 is about being self-aware around your stress and your triggers. So we are always aware that in different experiences in our lives, there are different things that are going to impact us differently. Sometimes we might have a very low threshold, other times we might have a higher threshold. But it is important to understand what is a stressor for you so you can be more effective in the management of it. So when a stressor approaches, or when you understand that this is something that does create a little bit more stress for you, you're better equipped in understanding what the outcomes or the results of engagement with this thing or this experience or this task will do. So once you are more aware, you're then able to set in greatest boundaries regarding that particular stressor. So being more intentional about how long you're going to take a break and what you're going to do during that break, or understanding how much time you're going to devote to this particular task. So understanding our stressors is going to help us better manage the stress levels. And third, but definitely not least, it's about being intentional with your practices of self-care. Now this brings in the conversation of work-life balance. It's important that you take time to bring the stress levels to a level of rest, again, so that you can reboot. And these engagements can take place in terms of self-care when it speaks to things such as sleep. So sticking to that 6 to 7 to 8 hour sleep pattern if it is what your body needs to rejuvenate. Physical exercise to exert your energy in a very positive way. Like I had mentioned with the breaks, you get up and you walk around. You get your body to do something separate from what it's been doing. That stress-inducing environment, right? It's also important for you to maintain your relationships. It's very easy sometimes, especially when you are trying to be focused and goal-driven, to completely push aside the things that bring you joy, the things that bring you a sense of accomplishment and reassurance. And when we are in a state of moving towards burnout, already in burnout, we feel very worthless and feel very demotivated, and sometimes feeling as though we are ineffective. So being certain of the fact that we're maintaining positive relationships and the structures that reinforce us and validate us is of great importance. It will always remind you that while in this particular task I'm having a bit of a challenge, in every other aspect of my life I'm doing just fine. And of course, it's always important to seek therapeutic support, especially when you experience yourself going over and beyond what is the norm. Now, these are just strategies for you to start thinking around how to buffer, but then also how to cope. However, if you feel as though these are not being quite as effective, it's always important to seek professional help from a therapist such as myself to better help you in engaging more individualized strategies to place you in the best position for yourself. Now, it's important to know that every human being is different, and every experience that we walk through is going to be just as different. The importance around understanding the self and then working in a way that is most resonant and most reciprocal to you is what's going to bring about the best results, so that you can maintain a good, positive, and most importantly, high potential level of yourself. Remember that anxiety and stress aren't necessarily bad. They're part of the growth, the lesson, and the performance building aspect of ourselves. However, it's about monitoring and measuring them where there are highs, where you're pushing and you're being the best version of yourself, but then also measured lows where you're able to rest, to recuperate, and above all else to reboot. The journey is long, the journey is different, but it is a journey well worth taking. You've just always got to keep in mind that you are the controller. You have the remote in your hand. You've just got to decide how you're going to work around it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Looking forward to seeing you in our next one. Cheers.